So, this is what it's like not to be poor.
And in my mother's womb was fashioned to be flesh in the time of 10 months, being compacted in blood of the seed of man.
That's right.
Of the seed of man.
The word seed is sperm, and sperm comes through having sex.
It's shut out of your father's rod,
right.
To put it in layman terms, in his penis.
That's right.
That means a man put his penis in a woman and bust off in it.
Then the angel said to him, "Take out the entrails of this fish, and lay up his heart and his gall and his liver for thee. For these are necessary for useful medicines."
The rest of the chapters of the book of Esther,
Go ahead.
which are found neither in the Hebrew nor in the Chaldee.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is in my lap, demanding attention, and Buttons is curled up, asleep on the couch. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cats. Get over it. This is a Biblical Apocrypha episode where Skullbeard and I read a book or two from the Biblical Apocrypha. Next episode will probably be more of this Apocrypha, I'm afraid, as I'm still working all kinds of hours. I got my paycheck for my first week of working 72 hours, and it was way bigger than I expected. In 1 week, I literally made as much as I did in a month at my previous job. We keep this up, and I'm going to have a car in no time. Amazingly, I have taken care of a number of bills this week, and I still have money left in my bank account. This is a very weird feeling for me. I'm afraid I still don't have any idea if I'm going to be able to make it to NanoCon this year. Right now, there's maybe a 50-50 chance that I'll be able to go, but I won't know for certain until late next week. I won't complain either way, as I need the money from work just as much as I need the exposure from appearing at NanoCon. All right. As you can tell, this episode's a little late. I pulled another, well, this one was only 11-hour shift, so I'm tired, so I'm just going to get to it. I will say that there's some issues with Skullbeard's audio. Apologize, but there was no way to fix it any better than what I've done. It's not through the whole thing, but we were doing a marathon recording session, so we had to go with what we had. And now here's Skullbeard and I reading the Apocrypha.
In every place then where this decree arrived, a feast at public expense was arranged for the Gentiles with shouts and gladness, for the inveterate enmity which had long ago been in their minds was now made evident and outspoken. But among the Jews there was incessant mourning, lamentation, and tearful cries. Everywhere their hearts were burning, and they groaned because of the unexpected destruction that had suddenly been decreed for them. What district or city, or what habitable place at all, or what streets were not filled with mourning and wailing for them? For them? Because it is a question.
Yeah. For with such a harsh and ruthless spirit were they being sent off all together by the generals in the several cities, that at the sight of their unusual punishments, even some of their enemies, perceiving the common object of pity before their eyes, reflected upon the uncertainty of life and shed tears at the most miserable expulsion of these people. For a multitude of gray-headed old men, sluggish and bent with age, was being led away, forced to march at a swift pace by the violence with which they were driven in such a shameful manner. And young women who had just entered the bridal chamber to share married life exchanged joy for wailing, their myrrh-perfumed hair sprinkled with ashes, and were carried away unveiled, altogether raising a lament instead of a wedding song, as they were torn by the harsh treatment of the heathen.
Well, it sounds like just a shitty time was had by all.
Yeah.
In bonds and in public view, they were violently dragged along as far as the place of embarkation. Their husbands, in the prime of youth, their necks encircled with ropes instead of garlands, spent the remaining days of their marriage festival in lamentations instead of good cheer and youthful revelry, seeing death immediately before them. They were brought on board like wild animals, driven under the constraint of iron bonds. Some were fastened by the neck to the benches of the boats. Others had their feet secured by unbreakable fetters. Bondage. Kinky.
Yeah. And in addition, they were confined under a solid deck, so that with their eyes in total darkness, they should undergo treatment befitting traders during the whole voyage, or slaves. When these men had been brought to the place called Shadia, and the voyage was concluded as the king had decreed, he commanded that they should be enclosed in the hippodrome, which had been built with a monstrous perimeter wall in front of the city, and which was well suited to make them an obvious spectacle to all coming back into the city, and to those from the city going out into the country, so that they could neither communicate with the king's forces, nor in any way claim to be inside the circuit of the city. And when this had happened, the king, hearing that the Jews' compatriots from the city frequently went out in secret to lament bitterly the ignoble misfortune of their brothers,
ordered in his rage that these men be dealt with in precisely the same fashion as the others, not omitting any detail of their punishment. The entire race was to be registered individually, not for the hard labor that was briefly mentioned before, but to the tortured to be tortured with the outrages that he had ordered, and at the end to be destroyed in the space of a single day. The registration of these people was therefore conducted with bitter haste and zealous intentness from the rising of the sun till its setting, and though uncompleted, it stopped after 40 days. Wow. You thought you had a lot of overtime.
Yeah, well, I have a feeling that 40 days is a clear indication that this is absolute bullshit.
Yeah, why does 40 come up so often? For 40 days and 40 nights.
Yeah, it's a common thread in just about every religion. The plausible reasons I've been given for this are that, 40 is double the number that you get by counting on your fingers and toes, so that's really huge. There's also a method of counting on your fingers, which I haven't fully figured out yet, but there's so many variations of finger counting that I can believe it's possible that you can count easily on both your hands the number of 40 by counting your fingers and like the knuckles.
Interesting. Okay.
So that would seem to explain why everything's got 40 in it. There's also the idea that all these mythologies are derived from a common series of stories that were done by primeval man way back before civilization began. There's a mathematical model that a French professor has worked out that says that these, that stories are, that given the way we know language and stuff permutates and changes as it spread, it's mathematically plausible that all these religious stories were actually derived from a single set of stories told, back when we first started talking and had religion. I mean, so, 200,000-300,000 years ago at the minimum.
That would not surprise me in the least.
I have read. I've not been able to find a journal article on it. I would love to hear that, to read one. But there are supposedly Native American tales that date back 40,000 years that talk about hunting mammoths. And the Australian Dreamtime legends, supposedly some of them date back 60,000 or more years.
Okay. Somehow that would not surprise me in the least.
Yeah, but we get into, when you're dealing with things like that, you get into the issue that, we're talking about people who are essentially identical to us, and there's, if you're going to crucify somebody, there's only so many ways you can nail them up.
I suppose.
So even if the stories are unconnected, they're going to be similar sounding, either because, we're all biologically alike, so we have certain experiences that are going to make us think the same way, or, because you can only nail you up so many ways. If you're going to talk about somebody getting nailed up, they've got to be in a certain position.
Yeah, the original CrossFit. Oh, I'm sorry.
No. That's one of my favorite memes. Is the picture of the guy carrying the cross and it says CrossFit.
Yeah, probably going to hell for that, but at least I'll be in good company.
Yeah. All right, back to this nightmare. The king was greatly and continually filled with joy, organizing feasts in honor of all his idols, with a mind alienated from truth and with a profane mouth, praising speechless things that are not able even to be communicate or to come to one's help, and uttering improper words against the supreme God. Okay, so before we go any farther, I just want to point out, this God inflicted an epileptic seizure on the king to prevent him from going into the temple, but has no problem letting the king round up all of the Jews and subjecting them to torture.
Yep, sounds about right.
Yeah. But after the previously mentioned interval of time, the scribes declared to the king that they were no longer able to take the census of the Jews because of their innumerable multitude. And you're just about to choke on your drink.
Yeah, and it's really going to hurt if it comes out through my nose.
Yeah. Transnasal beer. Yum, yum. Although most of them were still in the country, some still residing in their homes, and some at the place the task was impossible for all the generals in Egypt. I don't know.
Sure it was.
Yeah, this doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it sounds like they're making a bunch of shit up.
Yep.
After he had threatened them severely, charging that they had been bribed to contrive a means of escape, he was clearly convinced about the matter. When they said and proved that both the paper and the pens they used for writing had already given out... What? They had pens? This was an act of the invincible providence of him who was aiding the Jews from heaven. Wait, he's helping them do what?
The miracle of writer's cramp.
Well,
I mean, this is
slaughtered.
I mean, this is so absurd. This is a minor, this is a miracle. I mean, yeah, they ran out of paper. Oh.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh, I'm surprised there's not a feast of no paper.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
3 Mac 5. Then the king, completely inflexible, was filled with overpowering anger and wrath, so he summoned Herman, keeper of the elephants, and ordered him on the following day to drug all the elephants Well, that doesn't sound like a good plan. 500 in number, with large handfuls of frankincense and plenty of unmixed wine. Oh, okay, they're getting them drunk. And to drive them in, maddened by the lavish abundance of liquor, so that the Jews might meet their doom.
The doom of being trampled by drunken elephants. These guys have pretty good imagination, I gotta say.
When he had given these orders, he returned to his feasting together with those of his friends and of the army who were especially hostile toward the Jews.
And Herman, keeper of the elephants, proceeded faithfully to carry out the orders. The servants in charge of the Jews went out in the evening and bound the hands of the wretched people and arranged for their continued custody through the night, convinced that the whole nation would experience its final destruction. For to the Gentiles it appeared that the Jews were left without any aid.
Because in their bonds they were forcibly confined on every side, but with tears and a voice hard to silence, they all called upon the Almighty Lord and ruler of all power, their merciful God and Father, praying that he avert with vengeance the evil plot against them, and in a glorious manifestation rescue them from the fate now prepared for them. So their entreaty ascended fervently to heaven. So, why does fucking God wait this long? Okay? You know, what? Why doesn't he just strike down the soldiers as they show up to round them up, rather than waiting till they've been, dragged away from home and had all kinds of horrible things subjected to them before he decides to act? I'm sure they were praying when the soldiers showed up.
They're building suspense. I'm just wondering if God's going to actually do something. I'd be impressed.
Yeah.
Herman, however, when he had drugged the pitiless elephants until they had been filled with a great abundance of wine and satiated with frankincense, presented himself at the courtyard early in the morning to report to the king about these preparations. But the Lord sent upon the king a portion of sleep, that beneficence which from the beginning night and day is bestowed by him who grants it to whomever he wishes. And by the action of the Lord he was overcome by so pleasant and deep a sleep that he quite failed in his lawless purpose and was completely frustrated in his inflexible plan. Wait. God intervenes by making the guy take an extra long nap.
That's awfully anticlimactic.
Yeah, I'm disappointed.
Yeah. Then the Jews, since they had escaped the appointed hour, praised their holy God and again begged him who is easily reconciled to show the might of his all-powerful hand to the arrogant Gentiles. But now, since it was nearly the middle of the 10th hour, the person who was in charge of the invitations, seeing that the guests were assembled, approached the king and nudged him. And when he had with difficulty roused him, he pointed out that the hour of the banquet was already slipping by, and he gave him account of the situation.
Lazy bastard.
Yeah.
Must be a teenager. The king, after considering this, returned to his drinking. Oh, okay. And ordered those present for the banquet to recline opposite him. When this was done, he urged them to give themselves over to revelry and to make the present portion of his banquet joyful by celebrating all the more. After the party had been going on for some time, the king summoned Herman, and with sharp threats demanded to know why the Jews had been allowed to remain alive through the present day. 'Cause you're drunk. Damn it.
But you have to... Was the king's order such that, well, I want to watch these guys get trampled to death?
I don't believe that was actually stipulated.
No. So you got to wonder what Herman's up to. But when he, with the corroboration of his friends, pointed out that while it was still night, he had carried out completely the order given him. So I guess the elephants are semi-nocturnal? The king, possessed by a savagery worse than that of Phalaris, whoever the fuck that is, said that the Jews were benefited by today's sleep, but he added, tomorrow, without delay, prepare the elephants in the same way for the destruction of the lawless Jews. Man, he sounds like Trump. When the king had spoken, all those present readily and joyfully with one accord gave their approval, and each departed to his own home.
So those poor elephants have to sleep off their hangover and then get wasted again the next day.
Well, maybe they're like me and they don't get hungover.
What a life. But they did not so much employ the duration of the night in sleep as in devising all sorts of insults for those they thought to be doomed. Then, as soon as the cock had crowed in the morning, Herman, having equipped the beasts, began to move them along in the great colonnade. The crowds of the city had been assembled for this most pitiful spectacle, and they were eagerly waiting for daybreak. Yeah, nothing like watching a drunken elephant parade.
But the Jews, at their last gasp, since the time had run out, stretched their hands toward heaven, and with most tearful supplication and mournful dirges implored the supreme God to help them again at once. The rays of the sun were not yet shed abroad, and while the king was receiving his friends, Herman arrived and invited him to come out, indicating that what the king desired was ready for action. But he, upon receiving the report and being struck by the unusual invitation to come out, since he had been completely overcome by incomprehension, inquired what the matter was for which this had been so zealously completed for him.
Okay, let me get this straight. He slept in the first day, and now he's confused on the second day. This guy's got a problem.
I'm thinking God is really just punting on the miracle business here.
Oh, wait. Didn't he already have a stroke or a fit?
Yeah,
a seizure?
Yeah, that which would tie in with him sleeping in, because that is a side effect some people have when they are epileptics, is that they tend to sleep after they have a seizure. So were we to grant the possibility that this actually happened, then the king could have had a seizure the night before and slept in late and had another seizure and wasn't able to remember what the hell was going on, or when they were talking to him, he was in the middle of a seizure.
I'm not going to chalk this up as a miracle.
No.
This was the act of God who rules over all things, for he had implanted in the king's mind a forgetfulness of the things he had previously devised. Alright. So now he's got amnesia too. Then Herman and all the king's friends pointed out that the beasts and the armed forces were ready. O king, according to your eager purpose. But at these words he was filled with an overpowering wrath, because by the providence of God his whole mind had been deranged in regard to these matters, and with a threatening look he said,
Were your parents or children present, I would have prepared them to be a rich feast for the savage beasts instead of the Jews, who give me no ground for complaint and have exhibited to an extraordinary degree a firm and loyalty to my ancestors. In fact, you would have been deprived of life instead of these, were it not for an affection rising from our nurture in common and your usefulness. So, that's kind of cynical. So Herman suffered an unexpected and dangerous threat, and his eyes wavered and his face fell.
The king's friends, one by one, sullenly slipped away and dismissed the assembled people, each to his own occupation. Then the Jews, upon hearing what the king had said, praised the manifest Lord God, King of kings, since this also was his aid which they had received. The king, however, reconvened the party in the same manner and urged the guests to return to their celebrating.
After,
hey, party up. Huh? Party up, Wayne.
Yeah. After summoning Herman, he said in a threatening tone, How many times, you poor wretch, must I give you orders about these things? Equip the elephants now once more for the destruction of the Jews tomorrow. God must be a cat. That's the only thing I can figure out. He loves toying with his prey. That would explain all this shit. But the officials who were at the table with him, wondering at his instability of mind, remonstrated as follows.
"O king, how long will you try us? As though we are idiots, ordering now for a third time that they be destroyed, and again revoking your decree in the matter." As a result, the city is in a tumult because of its expectation. It is crowded with masses of people and also in constant danger of being plundered. Upon this, the king, a Phalaris in everything and filled with madness, took no account of the changes of mind which had come about within him for the protection of the Jews, and he firmly swore an irrevocable oath that he would send them to death without delay, mangled by the knees and feet of the beasts. Wow, this guy's a piece of work.
I wonder if his urine is blue.
Blue?
Yeah, have you not seen The Madness of King George?
Don't believe I have.
King George was thought to have a hereditary medical condition caused by inbreeding that it made him go mad throughout periods of his life, and one of the symptoms of that is that your urine turns blue.
Interesting. I had not heard that one.
Yeah.
Madness of King George.
Yeah. I forget. There's some big name actors in it. The guy who plays King George. The only other thing I have seen him in, he's excellent in the role, but the only other thing I've seen him in is Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1. He's an executioner in France.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah. Okay. And would also march against Judea and rapidly level it to the ground with fire and spear, and by burning to the ground the temple inaccessible to him, would quickly render it forever empty of those who offered sacrifices there. Then the friends and officers departed with great joy, and they confidently posted the armed forces at the places in the city most favorable for keeping guard. Why wait? Why not just kill him now?
Keep him in suspense, I guess. I don't know.
Now, when the beasts had been brought virtually to a state of madness, so to speak, by the very fragrant draughts of wine mixed with frankincense, and had been equipped with frightful devices, the elephant keeper
entered at about dawn into the courtyard of the city, now being filled with countless masses of people crowding their way into the hippodrome, and urged the king on to the matter at hand. So he, when he had filled his impious mind with a deep rage, rushed out in full force among the beasts, wishing to witness with invulnerable heart and with his own eyes the grievous and pitiful destruction of the aforementioned people. And when the Jews saw the dust raised by the elephants going out at the gate, and by the following armed forces, as well as the trampling of the crowd, and hearing the loud and tumultuous noise,
they thought that this was their last moment of life, the end of their most miserable suspense, and giving way to lamentation and groans, they kissed each other, embracing relatives and falling into one another's arms, parents and children, mothers and daughters, and others with babies at their breasts who were drawing their last milk. Not only this, but when they considered the help which they had received before from heaven, they prostrated themselves with one accord to the ground, removing the babies from their breasts, and cried out in a very loud voice, imploring the ruler over every power to manifest himself and be merciful to them, as they stood now at the gates of death. Dun, dun, dun!
That's a real cliffhanger ending.
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
3. So 3 max 6. Then a certain Eleazar, famous among the priests of the country, who had attained a ripe old age and throughout his life had been adorned with every virtue. Hey, I'm getting a real deja vu here.
Yeah.
Directed the elders around him to cease calling upon the holy God and prayed as follows. King of great power, almighty God, most high, governing all creation with mercy, look upon the descendants of Abraham, O Father, upon the children of the sainted Jacob, a people of your consecrated portion who are perishing as foreigners in a foreign land.
Pharaoh, with his abundance of chariots, the former ruler of this Egypt, exalted with lawless insolence and boastful tongue, you destroyed together with his arrogant army by drowning them in the sea, manifesting the light of your mercy upon the nation of Israel. That shit never happened. Sennacherib, exulting in his countless forces, oppressive king of the Assyrians, who had already gained control of the whole world. No, he didn't. By the spear, and was lifted up against your holy city, speaking grievous words with boasting and insolence. You, O Lord, broke in pieces, showing your power to many nations. The 3 companions in Babylon who had voluntarily surrendered their lives to the flames so as not to serve vain things, you rescued unharmed, even to a hair, moistening the fiery furnace with dew and turning the flame against all their enemies. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. That doesn't sound like a euphemism for anything at all.
Nope.
Daniel, who through envious slanders was cast down into the ground to the lions as food for wild beasts, you brought up to the light unharmed. And Jonah, wasting away in the belly of a huge sea-born monster, you, Father, watched over and restored unharmed to all his family. And now, you, who hate insolence, all-merciful and protector of all, reveal yourself quickly to those of the nation of Israel, who are being outrageously treated by the abominable and lawless Gentiles.
Even if our lives have become entangled in impieties in our exile, rescue us from the hand of the enemy and destroy us, Lord, by whatever fate you choose. Well, suppose this is the fate he has chosen for you. What then, motherfucker? Let not the vain-minded praise their vanities. Okay, I gotta stop here. They just gave God a fucking clip reel of all his miracles, and now they're saying, but don't worry about the vain people, okay?
Yep.
Let not the vain-minded praise their vanities at the destruction of your beloved people, saying, not even their God has rescued them. But you, O Eternal One, who have all might and all power, watch over us now and have mercy upon us, who by the senseless insolence of the lawless are being deprived of life in the manner of traitors.
And let the Gentiles cower today in fear of your invincible might, O honored one, who have power to save the nation of Jacob. The whole throng of infants and their parents entreat you with tears. Let it be shown to all the Gentiles that you are with us, O Lord, and have not turned your face from us, but just as you have said, not even when they are in the land of their enemies did I neglect them. So accomplish it, O Lord.
Just as Eleazar was ending his prayer, the king arrived at the hippodrome with the beasts and all the arrogance of his forces. And when the Jews observed this, they raised great cries to heaven, so that even the nearby valleys resounded with them and brought an uncontrollable terror upon the army. Then the most glorious, almighty, and true God revealed his holy face and opened the heavenly gates, from which 2 glorious angels of fearful aspect descended, visible to all but the Jews.
I don't get it. Oh, I don't get it. Why can't the Jews see these
Yeah, that's
angels? They opposed the forces of the enemy and filled them with confusion and terror, binding them with immovable shackles. Even the king began to shudder bodily, and he forgot his sullen insolence. I think he's having another seizure.
Yeah.
The beast turned back upon the armed forces following them and began trampling and destroying them. God works in mysterious ways.
Yeah. Sort of like my bowels after eating Taco Bell. Then the king's anger was turned to pity and tears because of the things that he had devised beforehand. For when he heard the shouting and saw all of them fallen headlong to destruction, he wept and angrily threatened his friends, saying, "You are committing treason and surpassing tyrants in cruelty. And even me, your benefactor, you are now attempting to deprive of dominion and life by secretly devising acts of no advantage to the kingdom."
Who is it that has taken each man from his home and senselessly gathered here those who faithfully have held the fortress of our country? Who is it that has so lawlessly encompassed with outrageous treatment those who from the beginning differed from all nations in their goodwill towards us, and often have accepted willingly the worst of human dangers? Loose and untie their unjust bonds, send them back to their homes in peace, begging pardon for your former actions.
Release the sons of the Almighty and living God of heaven, who from the time of our ancestors until now has granted an unimpeded and notable stability to our government. That's just weird. These then were the things he said, and the Jews, immediately released, praised their holy God and Savior, since they had now escaped death. Then the king, when he had returned to the city, summoned the official in charge of the revenues and ordered him to provide the Jews both wines and everything else needed for a festival of 7 days, deciding that they should celebrate their rescue with all joyfulness in that same place which they had expected to meet their destruction. Wow, I bet that causes some PTSD issues.
Oh, I'm sure. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was double-crossing them yet again.
Yep.
Par for the course. Accordingly, these disgracefully treated and near to death, or rather who stood at its gates arranged for a banquet of deliverance instead of a bitter and lamentable death, and full of joy they apportioned to celebrants the place which had been prepared for their destruction and burial. They ceased their chanting of dirges and took up the song of their fathers, praising God, their Savior and worker of wonders, putting an end to all mourning and wailing. They formed choruses as a sign of peaceful joy. Likewise, also the king, after convening a great banquet to celebrate these events, gave thanks to heaven unceasingly and lavishly for the unexpected rescue which he had experienced.
I have to think that some, ambitious member of the king's bodyguard would look at this and say, "King's nuts. If I kill him, ain't nobody gonna say nothing, and I'll be king. And it's good to be the king."
It is good to be the king. Oh, yes.
And those who had previously believed that the Jews would be destroyed and become food for birds, and had joyfully registered them, groaned as they themselves were overcome by disgrace, and their fire-breathing boldness was ignominiously quenched. But the Jews, when they had arranged the aforementioned choral group, as we have said before, passed the time in feasting to the accompaniment of joyous thanksgiving and psalms, until the king sobered up and said, "No, we got to kill these fuckers." It's going to be a lather, rinse, and repeat kind of thing.
It seems to be. It's been going on like this for what, 2-3 chapters?
At least. And when they had ordained a public rite for these things in their whole community and for their descendants, they instituted the observance of the aforesaid days as a festival, not for drinking and gluttony, but because of the deliverance that had come to them through God.
I'm flabbergasted. This sounds like such a bullshit story.
Yep.
Then they petitioned the king asking for dismissal to their homes.
But he'd already given that.
I know.
He said, you party, you go home.
Yep. So their registration was carried out from the 25th of Pachan to the 4th of Epiph.
Sounds good to me.
For 40 days. I thought it was a week-long feast. That was like 40 fucking days. What the hell? And their destruction was set for the 5th to the 7th of Epiph, the 3 days, on which the Lord of all most gloriously revealed his mercy and rescued them all together and unharmed. Then they feasted, provided with everything by the king, until the 14th day, on which they made the petition for their dismissal. The king granted their request at once, and wrote the following letter for them to the generals in the cities, magnanimously expressing his concern. What a swell guy.
One wonders how he's going to retcon all of this shit. King Ptolemy Philopator, we know what that means.
I thought it was Philippator, but whatever.
Well, no, Philippator is what you get from your doctor.
Right. Isn't that high cholesterol, maybe?
Yeah, if you're a Philippator, well, you touch yourself at night.
You make baby Jesus cry.
Yep. King Ptolemy Philopator to the generals and all in authority in his government, greetings and good health. We ourselves and our children are faring well, the great God guiding our affairs according to our desire. Certain of our friends, frequently urging us with malicious intent, persuaded us to gather together the Jews of the kingdom in a body and to punish them with barbarous penalties as traitors. So he's taking the Trump excuse and blaming everybody but himself.
Oh, but of course, that's the way it works, don't you know?
Yep.
For they declared that our government would never be firmly established until this was accomplished because of the ill will which these people had toward all nations. They also led them out with harsh treatment as slaves, or rather as traitors, and girding themselves with a cruelty more savage than that of a Scythian custom. They tried without any inquiry or examination to put them to death. But we very severely threatened them for these acts, and in accordance with the clemency which we have toward all men, we spared their lives. Since we've come to realize that the God of heaven surely defends the Jews, always taking their part as a father does for his children.
Except for when he doesn't.
Yeah, well, shit happens, you know.
Yeah. And since we have taken into account the friendly and firm goodwill which they had toward us and our ancestors, we justly have acquitted them of every charge of whatever kind. We have also ordered each and every one to return to his own home, with no one in any place doing them harm at all or reproaching them for the irrational things that have happened. For you should know that if we devise any evil against them or cause them any grief at all, we always shall have not man but the ruler over every power, the Most High God in everything, and is inescapably as an antagonist to avenge such acts. Farewell.
I'm wondering if this wasn't written by somebody who was like, hey, Jews are cool and we got Sky Daddy looking out for us.
Yeah.
It just kind of reads that way, I don't know.
Yeah.
Upon receiving this letter, the Jews did not immediately hurry to make their departure, but they requested of the king that at their own hands those of the Jewish nation who had willfully transgressed against the holy God and the law of God should receive the punishment they deserved. For they declared that those who for the belly's sake had transgressed the divine commandments would never be favorably disposed toward the king's government. The king then, admitting and approving the truth of what they said, granted them a general license so that freely and without royal authority or supervision they might destroy those everywhere in his kingdom who had transgressed the law of God. So they got a blank check, too.
Yeah. Nice.
Carte blanche.
Yes. So much for, forgiveness and all that shit. Just... When they had applauded him in a fitting manner, their priests and the whole multitude shouted hallelujah and joyfully departed. And so, on their way, they punished and put to a public and shameful death any whom they met of their fellow countrymen who had become defiled. In that day they put to death more than 300 men, and they kept the day as a joyful festival, since they had destroyed the profaners. Yes, let's celebrate murdering people who did whatever they could to survive.
Mm-hmm. Like you do.
Yeah. I mean, shit, the Europeans, after, their countries were liberated from the Nazis, generally the worst punishment they did to people, were like they shaved their heads and sent them out. They didn't, execute them unless they'd actually committed war crimes, for the most part.
They didn't, tar and feather them or anything.
Yeah.
But those who had held fast to God, even to death, and had received the full enjoyment of deliverance...
I need to talk to Ned Beatty about how enjoyable deliverance was.
Began their departure from the city, crowned with all sorts of very fragrant flowers, joyfully and loudly giving thanks to the one God of their fathers, the eternal Savior of Israel, in words of praise and all things of melodious songs. When they had arrived at Ptolemaeus, called Rose-bearing because of a characteristic of the place, the fleet waited for them in accord with the common desire for 7 days. There they celebrated their deliverance, for the king had generously provided all things to them for their journey, so each as far as his own house. Wow, what a swell guy.
Yeah.
He must have been moved by the spirit or something.
Something like that. Then after inscribing them as holy on a pillar and dedicating a place of prayer at the site of the festival, they departed unharmed, freed, and overjoyed, since at the king's command they had been brought safely by land and sea and river, each to his own place. They also possessed greater prestige among their enemies, being held in honor and awe, and they were not subject at all to confiscation of their belongings by anyone. Okay, I just gotta call bullshit on this. They take these people away from their home. Everybody in town knows the folks that are being extradited aren't coming back. And they just we'll leave the house there, We're not gonna... Fuck that, man. It's gonna be Loot City.
Bullshit, assholes. Fuck off.
Yeah. Besides, they all recovered all of their property in accordance with the registration, so that those who held any restored it to them with extreme fear. So the supreme God perfectly performed great deeds for their deliverance. Blessed be the deliverer of Israel through all times. Amen.
I'm going to have to say this is one of the most bullshit stories we've read so far.
Yeah. And I want to point out there was I saw it was a documentary on concentration camps, and they interviewed a guy who was a Polish Jew who had been taken from his home to a camp, and he survived, obviously, and then after the wall, he ended up in Germany or the U.S. after the war, and then after the wall fell, he went back home to Poland to see, the place that he'd grown up in. And when he knocked on the house that he'd lived in as a kid and, was talking to the people who lived there, they, the people who lived there found out that he was Jewish, and after he left, they destroyed the place, tearing it apart, looking for money they were certain he had hidden, his family had hidden there, because, of course, they were Jews, they were really wealthy, blah, blah, blah. And, and that he was really upset because I guess he had been planning on, moving back there at some point, and now he couldn't because the house had been destroyed.
I guess that doesn't apply to the Japanese, because during World War II, I don't know what you did with them in the U.S., but in Canada, we moved them into not really concentration camps, work camps, substandard housing. Everything they owned was confiscated and sold at auction, and if I'm not mistaken, the federal government took the money for the war effort.
We did the same thing with the Japanese population in the western United States. Most of the eastern Japanese did not suffer the same fate. Supposedly, there were exemptions that people could get. There was a Preston Tucker, who was the subject of the movie Tucker the Man in His Dream. He had a Japanese engineer working for him during the war that he had managed to get special permission to have the guy working for him, which was kind of funny because that Tucker was working on military contracts during the war. I haven't been able to confirm all that, even though I do know that the Japanese engineer did work for Tucker. I mean, the guy, he was a Japanese American. But yeah, George Takei spent his, from when he was 4 to 8, somewhere around there, in a internment camp in California, or in various places during World War II.
Yeah, he's not the only one. Are you familiar with David Suzuki?
Yep.
Yeah. He grew up in Caslow, Silverton, New Denver area, which is BC interior, and winters can be fucking brutal. The amount of snow they get there is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Great skiing if you're into that.
I know one of the camps that Takei was in Arkansas, which that's that's a pretty horrific fate unto itself, even if it doesn't snow all that much there.
Wait a minute. If I had a banjo, I think I could play the appropriate theme song.
Yeah. But no, they were scattered all over. It was generally west of the Mississippi. There were exceptions. Like I said, certain people got waivers, and there were, and I don't think they rounded up too many of those in New York, or places like that. It was just the western parts of the U.S. for some reason. I think there was a general. There were like 2 generals in charge of the project. One was assigned the Western U.S., the other was assigned the Eastern U.S., and the Eastern U.S. general was like, no, I ain't doing this shit. Whereas the Western one was all gung-ho for it.
Yeah, well, the West Coast was the one that was more vulnerable to Japanese attack, so...
Yeah, well, and there were larger numbers of immigrants, Japanese immigrants who settled in the West Coast. And there was something... They tried to set up an internment camp in Hawaii, and a lot of people there said, "The fuck you are." I don't remember all the details of that. I mean, they did have them there, but there was one that it was not set up the way it was supposed to be, because the locals were like, "You ain't doing this shit."
Yeah, no, that's unacceptable behavior any way you slice it.
Yeah.
It's a dick move, man.
Yeah. I used to be a member of a message board, and one of the guys we had was a World War II vet who had fought in Europe. And after 9/11, he said, very proudly, that at least we had learned enough not to round up Muslims.
Well, somebody kind of wants to.
Yeah. But
There's no accounting for taste.
No, but he was really proud of that fact. That we had learned enough from our mistakes in the past, and then of course we elected Trump, and this guy died of bladder cancer almost 10 years ago now, so he never lived to see the decline. Maybe it wasn't that long ago. I can't remember if he lived long enough to see Obama get elected or not. It was funny that on that same message board there was this guy who was just a rabid liberal, and he was the kind of person who, other rabid liberals were like, dude, shut the fuck up. You're not helping here. He had a massive stroke and never regained consciousness after it. This was in October of 2008, and he died right around the time of the election, so he had no way of knowing that the thing he would have loved the most in the world, a black man being elected president, actually happened. So.
Yeah. Bad timing.
Yeah.
Oh well, it happens. It happens to the best of us.
Yep.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.